Hi, I'm Leo Lardy, Sexual Health Development Officer at the Rainbow Project, and today I wanted to talk to you about consent. Consent is asking for permission from your partner before you engage in any sexual activity, or even just when you're changing sexual positions. Without consent, sex is considered rape or even sexual assault, so it's incredibly important to ask for consent. Not just because you want to avoid a potential criminal offense, harming your partner emotionally or physically, but because when we're able to have frank discussions about the sex that we want to have, and even the sex we don't want to have, the sex we do choose to have tends to be more pleasurable, safer, and generally just better. So how do you get consent? You need to ask your partner or partners if they want to have sex with you, and what type of sex they're comfortable with having. This needs to happen immediately before you have sex. Even if you and your partner have previously agreed to have sex at a specific time, date, location, you still need to ask for consent before you have sex together. And that's because your partner could have changed their mind between the time it took you to arrange that hookup and actually having sex. Now, people often wrongly assume that asking for consent is a real stuffy, solemn conversation that totally ruins the mood by being unromantic and unsexy. But consent can be wild sexy. It's just about how you phrase it. So you could say things like, does it feel good when I touch you there? Can I go down on you? Do you want me to keep going? Does that feel good? Do you want me to hit it from the back? All these things count as asking for consent. Now, we often think that consent is something that we do before we have sex and never again. But in reality, consent is an ongoing process throughout your sexual experience. Think of it as checking in with your sexual partner to see if they're still experiencing pleasure, if they're comfortable, or even if they're still into it. Consent is important, but consent is also sexy because great sex often is founded on great communication. So how do you know when you've gotten consent? You need to get an enthusiastic verbal yes from your partner or partners before you engage in any sexual activity or change sexual positions. Silence or not saying no does not equal consent. Consent cannot be forced or coerced. So if your partner says no to having sex with you or having sex with you in a particular position, and you pressure and pester them to change their no into a yes, that does not mean you've gotten consent. That means you've sexually coerced that person. Equally, if someone fears violence or abuse from denying your sexual advances, that does not mean they're going to give you consent. That means they are being sexually coerced. If someone has given you permission to have sex in one position, that means that they haven't given consent for other positions. So remember to talk with your partner beforehand about what positions they're comfortable with, and also to ask for consent before you change your sexual position. And remember, people can change their minds. It doesn't matter if you have bought that person dinner, if they're standing buck naked in front of you, if you've already put a condom on, or if you're actually having sex in that moment. If your partner says, stop, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't want to have sex, you have to respect that and stop. Because if you don't, that could be rape or sexual assault. So what are some other things that don't equal consent? Silence or not saying no, having had sex with them previously, being in a relationship with them inviting you back to their house or agreeing to go to yours, or what they're wearing. None of these things equal consent. Consent is getting that enthusiastic verbal yes before you engage in any sexual activity or change sexual positions with your partner or partners. So what are some situations in which you can't get consent even when you've gotten that enthusiastic verbal yes from your partners? The age of consent in Northern Ireland is 16 years old. So if your partner is under the age of 16, the law states that they cannot have sex even if they give you an enthusiastic verbal yes. If your partner is too drunk or too high, they cannot consent to sex. I know a lot of us like to experiment with drugs and alcohol during sex, but use your common sense. If your partner is slurring their words, having difficulty standing upright, their eyes are rolling to the back of their head, or even they're struggling to stay conscious, they are too intoxicated to consent to sex. A good rule of thumb is if you wouldn't trust that person behind the wheel of the car in that moment, then they are too intoxicated to have sex with. If someone is unconscious or asleep, they cannot consent to sex. Even if they consented to sex and just moments later they became unconscious or fell asleep, you have to stop and not have sex with them because they're no longer awake to raise any objections. Therefore, they can't give or take consent. Therefore, you can't get consent from them. As well, if you are somebody's police officer or teacher or social worker or spiritual leader, you should not be having sex with people within your care. There are professional working boundaries for people within these roles to stop clients from being exploited. So remember, sex starts with consent. Consent is getting an enthusiastic verbal yes before you engage in any sexual activity or change sexual positions. Great sex continues with ongoing consent, checking in with your partner to make sure that they are experiencing pleasure, that they're comfortable, and that they want to keep going. Remember that anybody can change their mind at any time during or before sex, and that you have to respect that and stop. Otherwise, it could be considered rape or sexual assault. If you want to learn more about consent or broadly just sexual health, you can get in contact with me, Leo Lardy, by call, text, email, direct message us at any of our social media pages, or check out our website for more details.